People, again, don't focus on the fact that the NBA All-Star Game, the first time it's ever been played outside of the United States, is one of the largest sporting events held around the world. It represents, I think, the confidence that the NBA, the confidence that the sporting world, the confidence that business has in our city. And it's a proud moment for our city to be able to host a global attraction like this. It's a great opportunity for us to showcase our city to the rest of the world. It will be broadcast, the game itself, in 215 countries in 49 different languages all around the world. And that is something that is going to bring great exposure, of course, to the game of basketball, but at the same time, great exposure to our city. And our city is becoming better and better known and more admired around the world as being one of the most diverse cities in the world. And I think that's certainly going to be reflected this weekend in what is seen by people around the world. The occasion of the NBA All-Star Game and All-Star Week will also bring thousands of visitors to the city as well, and that's great for the economy. But in a way that's almost even more important longer term, it's great to introduce people to Toronto. I certainly know from my experience in the Pan Am Games, just being in Nathan Phillips Square last summer and talking to people who said, wow, I've never been here before, or wow, I haven't been here in 10 or 15 years, and they just marveled at all aspects of the city, including the diversity, which they noticed, including the modern, dynamic nature of the city and how it looks and feels, which they noticed. And if you want to look for estimates of how much the economic benefit, direct economic benefit, is going to be to the city, the NBA All-Star host cities of the past in recent years have estimated the benefit to be somewhere between $85 and $100 million. And so I think it's going to be something that's very, very positive for Toronto in every single respect, for the kids that I talked about being inspired, for the economy, for the reputation of the city abroad in terms of all the publicity it will receive. There are three main events that, of course, will be the focus in addition to all the entertainment that goes on: the Rising Stars Challenge, All-Star Saturday Night, and the All-Star Game itself, which will be, of course, center stage at Air Canada on the weekend, those events. But there are many other events, including NBA Centre Court at the Intercare Centre that will be fun for the whole family. The Ricoh Coliseum will host a number of events, including the Celebrity Game and the All-Star Practice. And this huge structure, it's really, I'm not even sure accurate to call it a tent, but this huge tent, which is called True North, is an example of how the Raptors and Toronto are working together to make sure this All-Star weekend is a spectacular success. We will be sending visitors home with memories of the best All-Star weekend ever. And so I hope that Torontonians will get engaged in the event, will take the chance to come and be part of this spectacular event, whether it's coming down to the games itself or, in most cases, of course, watching it on television. It'll be a proud moment for the city. The world will be watching us, and I'm looking forward to cheering on our own Raptor stars, Kyle and DeMar, as they participate in this game, and at watching as we see people inspired and as we see benefits being shared by Torontonians of this great event. And again, my thanks to the Raptors and MLSE and to the NBA for having the confidence to bring this attraction to Toronto. And today's the day we sort of kick it off with a whole week of activities, even this week, and it gets ramps up day after day after day as we reach the end of the week and, of course, All-Star Weekend. So I'm happy to answer your questions. The two gentlemen up here with me can answer more technical questions about the week if you have questions in detail about the events, and I'm happy to answer questions about All-Star Week and other issues that you have on your mind on this Monday morning. I want to reiterate my heartfelt understanding of and sympathy for the difficulties that are being faced by cab drivers. But I also want to reiterate that we are moving as quickly as we possibly can to bring forward a new law that will regulate Uber and that will create a fairer situation for those involved in the cab industry. I can only say that a protest of this kind won't help make the All-Star Week better, but also will not speed up by 1 minute that process. I'll give you an example. There is consultation required to take place with different elements of the industry that is happening now that is required by law. If we don't do it, then the new bylaw we bring in will be struck down. And I am just saying that by having a protest and disrupting the city and frankly taking away from their own ability to make a living during that time, that is not going to speed this process up by 1 minute. And so I regret the fact that that is the course of action they're talking about, when in fact we're trying to work as fast as we can to bring an element of fairness, to bring a new regulation in to take us to the next chapter. Well, I can only say that at the last time when there was one, that there was a discussion at that time, and you'd have to turn to the law enforcement officials as to what we would do in the event that, intersections were blocked and this kind of thing. Because while I recognize the fact that the taxi drivers want to send a message, and I am sympathetic to the plight that they face, first of all, it won't speed up the process of changing the law by 1 minute. But secondly, we can't have the city kind of closed down in that kind of a manner, and the law enforcement officials will have to take whatever steps they deem to be appropriate if that sort of thing is engaged in again. But I hope it isn't. I very much regretted the tone of some of what happened at the City Council the other day. There can be no excuse, no matter what frustration people face, for the kind of name calling and the kind of insulting behavior. And I would hope that the industry, which I think can be part of the solution going forward in terms of more progressive, better choice, safer, better, more convenient transportation for people, can work with us to develop these regulations and to get them in place as soon as possible, as opposed to this other kind of plan, which I think doesn't accomplish anything.
Concerning all those about how it affects, you said the World's coming this weekend. Are you concerned about how it affects the reputation of our city?
I think the reputation of our city, both in terms of what people already know about it and in terms of what they're going to see when they get here, is tremendous. And I think people are going to be impressed by the Toronto they see. I think there are a lot of other cities from around the world that are facing some of these issues involving the transition from the old sort of way in which the ground transportation industry was conducted to a new way, and different cities are going through different kinds of transitions. I would like to see ours be one of those that goes through a peaceful transition, done as quickly as possible, which is what we're trying to do, as opposed to seeing it degenerate into something else. But I think in the end, the people who come here will have a positive impression of Toronto, because I'm not sure how you could go away without a positive impression of Toronto. And it's going to be our objective to make sure that happens. And I hope that the taxi industry will cooperate in that regard, in that I'm not trying to question for a moment their right to be unhappy or their right to be frustrated. I even understand that. But I hope they'll cooperate in trying to make us put the best possible display on for Toronto that we can.
Where's this going? Are you going to lock out 416 on the 19th?
We are sitting at the negotiating table and spending as much time there putting forward what we believe to be a responsible offer. At the end of the day, if you look at our financial circumstances and you look at a big part of our expenditures, which are related to the expenditures related to our very hardworking staff, and there are people who I don't believe want to have a work stoppage, and I certainly don't want to have one either. But we have to take account of the realities of the situation we're in 2016, and the realities that are taking place and that are established in every other part of the employment workplace, private or public, anywhere else. And all we're asking is to have a good faith discussion of that, and there are plenty of days left to have those good faith discussions. I think we all know that the general rhythm of labor negotiations is that the focus happens towards the end when there's a deadline facing you, and we all have one facing us now. And I hope that that time will be taken between now and then with good faith discussions that can lead to a responsible settlement, as I've said before, that is fair to the workers and also fair to the citizens who pay those bills. Well, I guess he's saying the obvious, which is if we can't come to an agreement, then there's something else that transpires that is not anything any of us wish for, including him, I'm sure. But he's also, I think, trying to emphasize the fact, as I am, We are putting forward a responsible proposal here that takes account of our financial realities, that takes account of how these municipal employees are treated and compensated relative to everybody else in the working world. And we're saying that there have risen some gaps between those two, the reality of what everybody else faces, including the people who are paying for all this and the people who work for us, that I believe they do a good job for us. And they simply have to be addressed. And the best way to address them is in good faith at the negotiating table, which is exactly what we're trying to do. May I start by saying, in regard to the fire in Scarborough at the seniors' residence, which is owned and operated by the Toronto Community Housing, by saying something that I said to a number of your colleagues who were there late on Friday night and early Saturday morning when I was there, that I want to express on behalf of the people of the City of Toronto my extreme condolences to the families of those who lost loved ones in the course of that fire. I had a chance to comfort some of their families, which was the #1 reason that I went there on Friday night on behalf of the people of Toronto, to say that this was a terrible tragedy that befell those families. I also had an opportunity to thank our first responders, including fire, police, EMS, the Toronto Community Housing staff, our emergency staff, and the Red Cross, because they were there doing a wonderful job, aided by the MP for the area and also by the local councillor. Now, with respect to going forward, the first thing we have to do, as with all cases of this kind, is await the results of the investigation, because at this stage it's unclear exactly what happened, and I think it's prudent and responsible for us to await the results of those investigations. Then I think it is appropriate for us to look, as we should be doing on a continuous basis, for ways in which we can make sure that these buildings are as safe as they possibly can be for our senior citizens. Now, those obviously carry with them, considerable practical realities in terms of how you could get that done, sometimes the very viability of actually physically retrofitting some of these buildings that are older. And I think we have to take a look at all of that, with the paramount concern that we have to have obviously being for the safety of the residents. And I think, while we own those buildings, there are many, many other buildings in the city that are privately owned that also fit into the same category as buildings that were built, I guess, pre-2007, and therefore don't necessarily fall under rules that would be different today. But I think we'll have to take a serious look at all of that, and I certainly will be registering with the Toronto Community Housing Corporation how much I am concerned as the Mayor of Toronto about making sure that the standards that are set today and that do apply to the Toronto Community Housing are met, because I think that while we have many challenges in front of us, as you've heard me say many times, in terms of repairing these buildings and putting them in a better way so people can have a more comfortable life, I think that the #1 thing we have to make sure is that they have a safe life, and they face many complications. For example, as fast as they fix fire doors quite often and make sure they close properly and so on, there are those who wish access to those buildings for illegal purposes who will then have them open within 24 hours. And this is a real challenge. It's a safety challenge and it's a law enforcement challenge, and these are the kinds of things they face. But we still have to place safety first and make sure we do what we can to try to make sure that those buildings are safe for the residents.
Mayor Tory, just following on that, why do you need an investigation? You got a senior fire official saying they don't have sprinklers. If they did have sprinklers, we wouldn't have seen the kind of tragedy, the kind of fatal incident that we saw. And there's a lot of TCHC buildings with no sprinklers. They don't come under the provincial regulation, and also TCHC, I'm sure, will say we don't have the money to do it. So what's the solution? How do you protect these people better, for some of the most vulnerable people in Toronto?
Well, David, I think, first of all, you're right. The seniors in particular, and this building happened to be a seniors building, are among the more vulnerable people in terms of their ability to move around in the event there's an emergency of this kind, or any other kind for that matter. And I think you have to take a special look at that. But I think we also have a responsibility probably to discuss with the fire officials and with the elected representatives the situation facing all kinds of other people, because there are many, many thousands of tenants, obviously, obviously, who live today in buildings that are privately owned or publicly owned that do not have sprinklers because the law, when those buildings were built, didn't require it, and the law today still doesn't require it. And so I think we have to have, and that's what I'm saying, an honest discussion about this that focuses on that reality and focuses on what we can do, both the government from the standpoint of the buildings that we have some responsibility for and other landlords from the standpoint of their responsibility, and have an honest discussion about that. And so I'm saying we should do that, but I think that that discussion, you're right, doesn't have to flow out of the results of this investigation, but I think it would be helpful if they could complete this investigation and determine what happened in this fire first before we use it as a basis to say, well, we should therefore do